peace and grace. I would like to discuss with you the topic of calendars according to what the modern sciences say. And in order for me to do this and discuss this with you in the next few minutes, I would like to ask you to please bear in mind several points. As you can see, the first of those points is for us to understand that modern sciences tell us that there is no such a thing as a perfect calendar. Nothing like that. The second point is that a calendar is only a division or an organizational system for dividing days according to different purposes. Could be religious purposes, could be agricultural purposes, and so on and so forth. The third point is that the Gregorian calendar is only an adjustment, not a correction. I am aware that there are some people who think that the Gregorian calendar is a correction, but it is not. It is just an adjustment. Those people fall in one of two categories. Either they are non-Christians altogether, or they are Christians who lack some understanding. And let us know why. We will be discussing this in a few moments' time. But before doing that, our fourth point is that in order for us to delve into the topic or the subject of calendars, we need to be familiar with some other scientific backgrounds, such as history, such as bits of astronomy, as well as some physics. The fifth and final point, which will last with us and will remain throughout our discussion, is that the Coptic calendar reflects our Coptic Orthodox faith. And the Orthodox faith, as you know better than me, is based on three criteria or three main pillars. The first criterion or pillar is the Holy Bible. The second is patrology, or the forefathers' teachings. And the third one is the rites and dogma. And we will be discussing this, but for us to understand that our Coptic Orthodox faith has remained fixed and unchanged, so has the Coptic calendar. It has remained unchanged and fixed throughout the ages. So let's view history with a bird's eye view. We would notice that about 28 or 29 centuries before Christ, and some sources say even 40 or 41 centuries before Christ, the Egyptians started to use what is called the civil calendar, and in that calendar the year was designated to have 365 days only. There were no leap years. And then we move on to the year 238 before Christ. We find the decree of Canopus. The decree of Canopus basically states that the year consists of 365 days and a quarter. So every fourth year should be a leap year. But the Egyptian priests and people objected to that decree, and it was never applied in Egypt. I am aware that so many people think that the decree of Canopus was applied, but it was not. Moving on to the year 45 before Christ, when Egypt became a Roman state, Julius Caesar had taken the knowledge from an Egyptian scientist called Sisagenes, who devised the Julian calendar, and in it he designated the year to consist of 365 days and a quarter. So every fourth year was a leap year. And actually, sources say that Sisagenes himself knew that the arithmetic average of the year's length is a little bit less than 365 days and a quarter. And in the year 25 before Christ, that was when Octavius or Augustus Caesar had decreed that Egypt had to incorporate the year to be 365 days and a quarter. And at that time, the civil calendar, as it was known, had changed into the Coptic or Alexandrian calendar. But Coptic calendar, not the Coptic church. Okay, and then after Egypt became Christian, in the last decade of the 2nd century, Anba Demetrios, the vine dresser, who sat on the See of St. Mark, established the Apokty Calculation. And in the year 193, there was a pre-ecumenical council called the Second Council of Rome, whereby Anba Demetrios, the vine dresser, sent to the Bishop of Jerusalem, as well as the Patriarch of Rome and the Patriarch of Antioch, and informed them of the Apokty Calculation. They were pleased with this piece of information. And it was not until around the year 260 when there was a priest, Father Anatolius, who later became Bishop Anatolius of Laodicea in Syria. He actually described and calculated arithmetically the Metonic cycle. So in short, we can say that he added one step to the formula of the Apokty Calculation. And then we know that in the 4th century, the calendar of the martyrs started to be used retrospectively. So in the 4th century, they calculated the start of the martyrs' calendar to be the year of starting the reign of Diocletian. And we know that in the year 325, the Council of Nicaea was convened. By the way, one of the most important outcomes of the Council of Nicaea, which was presided by Constantine the Great before he became Christian, was for the Coptic Pope to assign the Feast of Resurrection, assign the date of the Feast of Resurrection, and inform the whole world in the form of the other churches. However, even though we were all one church and there were no divisions at that time, yet the Church of Rome continued using lunar cycles, which are not the ones that Anba Anatolius had worked out and calculated logically, rationally, and intellectually. They had used their own lunar cycles, and when they got wrong dates or different dates to the Coptic Church, consulting with their own scientists, the scientists would respond and say, yes, you guessed it, that the Coptic method is the right method. And this is actually written in some Catholic websites, as you can see. And then in the 5th century, the Coptic Pope, Saint Kyrillos, the pillar of the faith, had applied the Apokty Calculation on the Julian calendar. Because up until that time, the Apokty Calculation was only based on the Coptic calendar. But he was the first one who had applied it to the Julian calendar. And he made some resurrection tables. They call it Easter tables. Okay, whatever the name is. He worked out resurrection tables spanning across a period of 95 years, from the year 437 up until the year 531. And it was not until the 10th century when all the churches across the whole world had adopted the method of the Coptic Pope, even though we had seen divisions at that time and our church was already isolated and ostracized. But by the 10th century, all the churches have been celebrating the Feast of Resurrection according to the Apokty Calculation, according to the date that the Coptic Pope establishes. Alright, as a side note, we see that in the beginning of the 16th century, there was a monk by the name of Copernicus. He is Polish, but he was Catholic, who plagiarized the knowledge of the Persian scientists and advanced the theory of heliocentrism, whereby the earth revolves around the sun. He did not do anything except look with his own eyes, look at some sundials, some other means to calculate and work out the length of the day and the length of the year, and invited some Persian scientists to him, where they had informed him of their knowledge with their own observatories, and he took this from them and advanced the theory for himself. The more that we read, the more that we realize that the European scientists had plagiarized and taken sciences from other nations and referred them as if they were their own. In any case, I want to say that at that time, in the 16th century, the Catholic Church did not believe in heliocentrism or that the earth moved at all. So, just 1 year before his death, or maybe the year of his death, either 1542 or 1543, he presented his thesis to Pope Paul III, and on the thesis he got an introduction from another scientist who just put some flexible wordings so that it would not be misunderstood as though Copernicus is a heretic. He did not want to be punished for his theory. Okay, and the last thing to say in these slides is that in the year 1545, the Council of Trent was organized, and on the fringes of that council, some scientists were called to go back to calculating the Catholic Easter according to the teachings of the Council of Nicaea. At that time, they had seen that vernal equinox had shifted by 10 days, even though the vernal equinox, since the Council of Nicaea, was known to be an ecclesiastical vernal equinox rather than an astronomical one. But that's what they had done. After the discussion so far, we would like to mention one point to the new generations, which is to say that the Nicene forefathers, when they have determined the rules of determining the Feast of Resurrection date, their main aim was for all Christians all over the world with all the diverse backgrounds, because as we said, even though it was one church at the time, all nations and all peoples had their own cultures and had their own traditions. But the main aim of the Nicene Fathers was for all Christians to celebrate the Feast of Resurrection only on one day, to be united in the celebration. However, as for the Catholic Church in the 16th century, as we are going to discuss in more detail right now, when they had established the Gregorian calendar, they actually did that with the aim of isolating themselves from a specific denomination, and in doing so, they actually isolated themselves from all Christians of the world. And we will know how and why in a bit more detail right now. So let's focus on the year 325, where Council of Nicaea was convened, and we will take this as our reference point. And I repeat once again that during the Council of Nicaea, the Coptic Pope was the one who had the duty of telling all the other churches we were all one church at the end of the day, with the precise date of the Feast of Resurrection. And the vernal equinox at that time was designated to be an ecclesiastical vernal equinox, not an astronomical one. Then, in the year 451, we know that the Council of Chalcedon had been convened and the Coptic Church was ostracized and isolated. In the 6th century, in the year 525, there was a monk from the Church of Rome called Dionysius Exiguus who adopted the Alexandrian Metonic cycle that was first calculated by Anatolius and propagated it and spread it across all the other nations, especially in the West. And he developed the Feast of Resurrection tables that were first introduced by Pope Kyrillos, the Pillar of the Faith, the Coptic Pope, developed them further from the year 532 up until the year 626, a period spanning across 95 years. And then in the 11th century, the big schism happened and we had what is called Eastern Orthodox churches and the Catholic Church. And then in the year 1517, a person by the name of Martin Luther started protesting against the Catholic Pope, and in the year 1521 he was excommunicated because of what he called Protestantism, or in other words, the Reform, or the movement of Reformation was against the Catholic Church as a whole. And then in the year 1545, the Council of Trent was convened, and it was called the Counter-Reformation. And on the fringes of the Council of Trent, it was assigned to someone called Lilius to recalculate the Easter date according to the Nicene Council teachings. That was the main purpose. This person did his calculations based on the astronomical vernal equinox, using his own vision and his own eyes, sundials, observatories, astronomical observatories. And yes, I am aware that some people think that the Western smart guys have calculated things logically, rationally, and intellectually. This is not what happened. This was not actually the case. They did not use their brains, they actually used their eyes and their visions. So, if we carry on, this person died in the year 1576, and his brother took his studies, and some of the studies were lost. And now, I would like to ask a very important question for the sake of critical appraisal. How much was lost? We don't know. Is it 1%? How big is 1%? How big in terms of quality, not quantity? It might be the most important thing in the whole of the studies that he had written. Or 90% or 95% could have been lost. We don't know. So, the gentleman's brother took his studies and gave it to a consortium of other smart guys in the year 1577 who were led by Clavius. This Clavius could not explain some of the things that Lilius had written, and he had changed some things himself. And he was the one who convinced Pope Gregory XIII to go ahead with the Gregorian adjustment and the start of the Gregorian calendar. This is not the end point of our discussion. Actually, there is a very, very important benchmark that had occurred in the year 1963, in the 20th century, in the Second Council of Vatican, when the Catholic Church themselves have realized that the Gregorian calendar was not fit for purpose, for the purpose that it was aimed at in the first place, as well as scientifically. It does not serve anything as was claimed in the past. So in the year 1963, they had made a very important realization, and stated that they do not object to changes to the Gregorian calendar whatsoever, according to what the modern sciences say. Two small points to mention to our new generations here. The first point is that the whole world owes it to the Coptic forefathers for preserving the Christian faith. And it is true. I heard this saying by many priests, such as Father Dawood Lamay, and other well-known speakers and bishops, maybe even popes in the Coptic Church, but I'm sorry, I do not trust them that easily. I do not take these things lightly until I have researched myself and read it with my own two eyes, and saw how the whole Christian world really did appreciate what the Coptic forefathers did. And one of the forms of preserving the faith that the Coptic forefathers had done was through the Apokty Calculation and the rules for determination of the Feast of Resurrection date, with the aim of celebrating with the whole Christian world on one day. So it is real, it is true. Without the Coptic forefathers, had it not been for the Coptic forefathers, Christianity would have suffered so much and maybe even not existed anymore. That's the first point. The second point is about the Gregorian calendar. As we have just said, that the Catholic Church, the Vatican Church, in the Second Council of the Vatican, or the Second Vatican Council as they call it in 1963, did actually acknowledge plainly that the Gregorian calendar has so many flaws and it was not fit for purpose, as we have just said. And actually, they kept changing the dates even recently as the 19th and the 20th centuries, and they keep changing the dates. So I would like to ask how and why. Is Jesus Christ not one? Is God not one? This is the theme that I keep hearing all the time, but apparently it is actually from them. They are not doing this against any other denomination as they had done in the 16th century, but they actually feel that they need to change the calendar every so often in their martyrology, which is the counterpart of the Synaxarium. So they keep changing the dates. I wonder why and how. So by looking at this is where all the calendars, the known calendars, have started and their corresponding dates. And let us move on until we come to the year 1582. These are the days. This is the first day where Pope Gregory XIII decreed the usage of the Gregorian calendar. However, if we see this is actually the astronomical vernal equinox in the year 1582. It occurred on the 10th of March. Actually, when Lilius was doing his own studies, because he's a smart guy and all of these people are smart guys, when he was looking and calculating and seeing how long a year is, at his time, the vernal equinox used to fall on the 11th of March. 10 days difference between his days, the vernal equinox in his days, and the one that was designated as an ecclesiastical vernal equinox in the period of the Council of Nicaea. However, in the year 1582, it happened that it occurred on the 10th of March. And that's why we said that Clavius couldn't really change some of the things that Lilius had said. Because according to this, they should have taken away 11 days, not 10 days, as the Gregorian calendar stated afterwards. Anyway, we know that the 25th of Baramhat is the ecclesiastical vernal equinox day. The 29th of Baramhat is the Feast of Annunciation. And that is the date that I was able to gather, which was the astronomical full moon. And that is the last date that all the churches all over the world, however different in their beliefs, had celebrated the Feast of Resurrection. Please pay attention to this. Since the 10th century, up until the year 1582, the Feast of Resurrection has always been assigned by the Coptic Pope, and all the churches celebrated on the same day, up until that day. In fact, looking at some sources, the holy fire started appearing on a regular basis annually from the 11th century, after all the churches all over the world had celebrated on the same day according to the Coptic Pope. It had actually occurred before, but not on a regular basis. So now I would like to ask those smart guys who devised this new ingenious phenomenon, where were you? Were you actually in the darkness of the Renaissance? Actually, there are critics and some scientists who argue that the Renaissance period actually applies only to art and fashion, but in sciences, as we can see. Anyway, they should have known, and they must have known, especially their Pope. I would be very disappointed if he hadn't, that there was a phenomenon called holy fire, which is a miracle from God, which we believe in. Probably they hadn't believed. I don't know. Anyway, let's look at this line. This line is the 4th of October. I'm going to mention one funny thing, really funny, in their martyrology. But let's see, this is the date, the 8th of Baba, in the year 1299, which corresponded to the 5th of October, and that was when they had started the new style Gregorian calendar. Okay, so what happened afterwards is that they created a date, a new date for Christmas, which was the 25th of December, which actually was not the 25th of December, it was the 15th of December, as per the Julian calendar, and the 19th of Gyak in the Coptic calendar, and that is the line for the new Gregorian year 1583. And as we know, our own Christmas, which had not changed since the 5th century, on the 29th of Gyak, fell on the 25th of December, as per the Julian calendar, naturally, but it was on the 4th of January in the year 1583, Gregorian, the new style Gregorian. And that is the year 1583, the line. So, in doing so, they have fallen into 4 different problems. At least four we will discuss now, and there are other flaws we will be discussing a bit later. But let's talk about the first flaw, or the first mistake. If we focus on the length of the days between the start of 1582 till the start of 1583 Gregorian calendar, this period spans across actually 355 days. Well done, smart guys. You have changed your year, which follows the solar calendar rules, into a lunar year, 355 days. That is the definition of a lunar year. A lunar year is a year that consists of 355 days, sometimes 354, sometimes 353. So we say, well done. This is not the only flaw. Let's talk about the second mistake. The second mistake is this newly originated day of Christmas, the 25th of December. Actually, as we all know, 9 months should pass by the Feast of Annunciation up until the Feast of Nativity. But when they create a new day for Christmas, that means that in the year 1582, there was not 9 months period between the Feast of Annunciation and their Christmas. Wow, another smart guy, ingenious idea. Okay, the third flaw is the funny mistake that I was talking about. In their martyrology, there was one saint who died on the 4th of October, this point. And in their martyrology, it says that she was buried the next day, the 15th of October. Oh, how come? Is it the 15th of October or the 5th of October? Should it be? I don't know. You tell me? Okay. So, what if it is the 15th of October when she died on the 4th of October? How can this be the next day? Can you not be more specific and more precise? How can I explain or calculate the period of the life of this Catholic saint from the day of birth up until the day of burial? Is it not really illogic? Okay, the fourth flaw is a flaw that was commented upon by two scientists, one American scientist from NASA, and the second scientist is from Canada, from University of Toronto. Let's go to this slide to see it's a calculation flaw. The fourth flaw is an arithmetic one. It is actually arguing against one of the rules of the Gregorian adjustment or the Gregorian calendar. This rule states that if a century year is divisible by 100 without a remainder, it is a simple year. But if it is divisible by both 100 and 400, it is a leap year, as was the case in the year 2000, the start of the 21st century. It was divisible by both 100 and 400, and that's why it was a leap year, as was the case with the Julian calendar, and therefore both calendars went hand in hand without any changes in the days. Okay, so in what is called the proleptic Gregorian calendar, or Gregorian calendar applied retrospectively up to the days of our reference point, the Council of Nicaea in the 4th century, for the adjustment that was aimed by those smart guys. Naturally, in the 4th century, we would find that both the Gregorian and the Julian calendars go hand in hand without any change. In the 5th century, there would be no difference either. Why? Because the start of the century, the year 400 is divisible by 400 and 100, and then it is a leap year, so it is exactly like the Julian year. So both go hand in hand. What happens in the 6th century? In the 6th century, the Gregorian calendar moves forward by 1 day. That means that it reaches the 1st of January before the Julian calendar does, because the Julian calendar will still be on the 31st of December. In the 7th century, the difference will be 2 days. In the 8th century, the difference will be 3 days. In the 9th century, the difference will remain 3 days. You can see where I'm going with this, can't you? In the 10th century, the difference becomes 4 days. In the 11th century, the difference becomes 5 days. In the 12th century, the difference becomes 6 days. And in the 13th century, the difference remains 6 days, because the start of the 13th century is the year 1200, which is divisible by both 100 and 400 without any remainder. In the 14th century, the difference becomes 7 days. In the 15th century, the difference becomes 8 days. And in the 16th and 17th centuries, the 16th century, when the Gregorian calendar was applied, the difference becomes 9 days. 9 days for 200 years. So, those smart guys basically tell us a rule that does not apply to their adjustment. That's regardless of either taking away 10 days or 11 days, because as we have seen in the year 1582 itself, the vernal equinox astronomically occurred on the 10th of March, not the 11th of March, as opposed to the 21st of March, which was designated to be the ecclesiastical vernal equinox since the 4th century by the Nicene Fathers. Okay, so how does this affect the Coptic calendar and the Julian calendar at all? Let's see. So the message to the new generations from this discussion point is very clear, very short and concise, which is that if you call yourself a well-learned person, a smart guy, and you claim to understand bits about mathematics and physics and astronomy, then you should actually give me those claims solidly and prove them to me, but not to give me a calendar that actually does not really reflect what you aim to do in the first place, what you purport to do. This is beyond a ridiculous joke. I'm sorry to say it like this, but it is. So the main important point is that, as we know, and as the sciences tell us, even the sciences of old, that astronomical phenomena are not really determined or defined by mere numbers or by mere calculations or formulae. They cannot be. And all what we are doing are only efforts for us to understand them and make them clearer in a way to understand in terms of our mathematical abilities. However, things keep changing all the time, as we have just seen, and we will keep seeing. Things will keep changing. Nothing ever stays the same with regards to nature, natural phenomena, and astronomy and astronomical phenomena. So let's check what would happen to the Coptic dates, feasts, fasts, and all the other events before the year 1582. And I believe you all know more than me that the current calendrical events in terms of fasts, feasts, as well as the other events would have been mostly, if not wholly, developed by the year 1582. So that means that if we compare the Coptic timeline with the Roman timeline, Roman because there was no Julian or Gregorian at that time before the year 1582, but we know that it is Julian, the Feast of Nativity would fall on the 29th of Kiak or the 28th after the Coptic leap years, which corresponds to the 25th of December in the Roman calendar. The 11th of Tuba, the Feast of Theophany, corresponds to either the 6th or the 7th of January. And this is the earliest date possible for the Feast of Resurrection, and that is the furthest day possible. And the period between both dates has to be 35 days, and we will know shortly why 35 days specifically. And following on from that, the earliest date for the start of the Great Lent is the 1st of Amshir, and the latest date is the 5th of Baramhat, which means that if we start the Great Lent on the 1st of Amshir, we celebrate the Feast of Resurrection on the 26th of Baramhat. And if we start the Great Lent on the 5th of Baramhat, we celebrate the Feast of Resurrection on the 30th of Baramuda. And again, there is a 35-day period between the earliest and latest start to the Great Lent. And following on from that, again, the earliest date for starting the Apostles' Fast is the 16th of Bashons, and the latest date is the 20th of Bo'ona
with 35 days between both start dates, naturally. Okay, and we know that the 5th of Abib, the Feast of the Apostles, is a fixed date which corresponds to the 29th of June in the Roman calendar. And that tells us that the longest duration for the Apostles' fast is 49 days, or 50 days if the feast falls on either Wednesday or Friday, and the shortest duration is 15 days or 16 if the feast falls on either Wednesday or a Friday. And we know that on the 16th of Mesra, which corresponds to the 9th of August, is the commemoration of the Assumption of Virgin Mary's body to heaven. We know that the Dormition of Saint Mary in the Coptic Church is the 21st of Tuba, but I did not mention that. I wanted to mention the commemoration of the Assumption for another reason, which we will know a bit later. And as we all know, the Nairouz feast, or the beginning of the Coptic New Year, corresponds to the 29th of August or 30th, if there are 6 days in Nasi. By the way, Nasi is actually an Arabic word. It's not Coptic. Some people think it's Coptic, it is not. And the Arabic word does not mean forgotten, as some people think. Actually, Nasi in the Arabic language means the support or the crutch, something which supports the year. And the 5 days of Nasi, or 6 days, are only a support to the year, so that it completes the 365 days or 366 days in leap years. It is not a month per se in the strict sense of the word. Okay, so that's all before the year 1582. What about from the year 1582 onwards, especially the 16th and 17th centuries? Why 16th and 17th centuries? Because we pass by the year 1600, which is the beginning of the 17th century. The year 1600 is a leap year in both the New Style Gregorian calendar as well as the Julian calendar. So all the dates remain corresponding to one another up until the 17th century. What happened? Nothing happened at all with regards the Coptic dates, fasts, feasts, and all the other events. What had really happened is that there has been new dates assigned to the Coptic events, as we can see down below. For example, the Feast of Nativity has become the 4th of January New Style Gregorian, while it is 25th of December still in the Julian calendar, and so on and so forth for all the other events up until we reach the 5th of Abib, the 29th of June in the Julian calendar. We will find that it has become the 9th of July in the Gregorian calendar. And what does that tell us? It tells us that obviously this is the day of the Feast of the Apostles. It tells us that the longest duration of the Apostles' fast remains 49 days, or 50 days if the feast falls on a Wednesday or a Friday, and the shortest duration will be 15 days or 16 if the feast falls on either a Wednesday or a Friday. So that means that the duration of the Apostles' fast has not changed at all. We have heard some people argue and mistakenly claim that since the introduction of the Gregorian calendar, our dates have changed, and also, as well as the dates changing, the Apostles' fast has lengthened, has got longer, has become bigger. Where? How did it become bigger? How did it lengthen? There is no such a thing. These are people who do not understand the calendar in so much depth. But you can see now for yourselves, you can understand what I mean. Let's carry on. We will find that the 16th of Mesra would fall on the 19th of August as per the New Style Gregorian calendar, but it remains the 9th of August as per the Julian calendar. The start of the Coptic New Year will fall on the 8th or the 9th of September. And afterwards, something very interesting happened, which is they have changed the date of their Christmas. So as to fall on the 25th of December New Style Gregorian calendar. That actually corresponds to the 15th of December as per the Julian calendar, which corresponds to either the 18th or the 19th of Kiyak in the Coptic calendar. Okay, moving on to the 18th century, we will notice that the only change that happens is to the bottom part of the screen. That is to say, the Feast of Nativity fell on the 5th of January, the Feast of the Apostles fell on the 10th of July, the commemoration of the Assumption of Virgin Mary's body to heaven fell on the 20th of August, and the Coptic New Year started on the 9th or the 10th of September. And as we can see, the Western Christmas had shifted up by one day to December the 14th in the Julian calendar, or the 17th or the 18th of Kiyak in the Coptic calendar. Okay, so what about the 19th century? Nothing had changed except for the bottom part of the screen again. The Feast of Nativity fell on the 6th of January. The Feast of the Apostles fell on the 11th of July. The commemoration of the Assumption of the body of Virgin Mary's fell on the 21st of August. And the Coptic New Year started on the 10th or the 11th of September. And the Western Christmas shifted up by one day further. What about our current time in both the 20th and 21st centuries? The only change that happened is the bottom part of the screen. Once again, the Feast of Nativity now falls on the 7th of January. The commemoration of the Assumption of Virgin Mary's body, the 22nd of August. Obviously, the Feast of the Apostles on the 12th of July, and the Coptic New Year on the 11th or the 12th of September. And the Western Christmas has shifted up by another day to the 12th of December Julian calendar, or the 15th or the 16th of Kiyak. And we would notice that the year 2000, which is the start of the 21st century, was a leap year in both the New Style Gregorian calendar as well as the Julian calendar, and that's why the two centuries follow on with each other in terms of the Western dates, the Roman calendar dates. But the Coptic dates are stable and fixed all the way through. So now we ask ourselves, what is going to happen in the 22nd century? Nothing at all. It is just that the bottom part of the screen is going to change once again. Feast of Nativity will fall on the 8th of January. The Feast of the Apostles will fall on the 13th of July. The commemoration of the Assumption of the body of Virgin Mary's will be on the 23rd of August. The Coptic New Year on the 12th or 13th of September. And the Western Christmas will keep shifting up one day further.
Okay, so our message to the young generations and the new generations is very simple again and very easy. From our discussion so far, we can say and we have seen that there is no such a thing as interference between the Coptic dates and each other, which means that what we have heard from so many people, not only laymen, but actually some people in a high spiritual rank as priests and hegumens, saying things such as that the Feast of Nativity will keep shifting until it coincides with the Great Lent. There is no such a thing, and we have seen it will never coincide with the Great Lent. It is important for us to give this message and send out this message to the new generations. Yes, in our Coptic Orthodoxy, faith is the most important and the foremost in all aspects of life. But that does not mean that we ignore science. We do not. Science may come in the second rank, may come even in the third rank or a lower rank than faith, dogma, rituals, traditions, so many other things. But that does not mean that we ignore science or that we do not follow scientific facts. That is wrong, and we have seen this already. And we will see it still. Please bear with me. So the important message to reach the new generations is that we are not people who do things haphazardly. and we are not people who are hypocrites, for example, or people who just do things for the scene, for showing off. We do not. We actually do everything based on scientific facts, and our Synaxarium is full of such things, and we will see how in the next few minutes. But that is what is important for us to understand and to propagate and send out such a message to the new generations. Let us carry on. Let's talk about the Apokty calculation. As we had discussed before, the Apokty calculation was established by Demetrius, the vine dresser. He established the principles of the Apokty calculation, and it was developed and evolved by some people like Anatolius, and then reached its final stage with all its developments and all the agreements by the forefathers of the Council of Nicaea. Okay, Apokty is a word derived from the Greek word which means epact. And epact simply means the remainder of the equation. Okay, so there are four steps to the Apokty calculation. The first step is we take the year of the martyrs and subtract 1 from that figure, and then we divide it by 19. Why do we subtract the figure of the martyr's year by 1? The answer is very simple. They found that the beginning of the Metonic cycle coincided with the second year of the martyrs. We said 19. Why 19? 19 because it's the Metonic cycle. And we will explain that very shortly and very briefly. Right, okay. We take this remainder, which is y. Y actually is not the remainder as a whole. It's the numerator of the remainder. Okay. So we take y and multiply it by 11. And the result of this step, we take 30 out of it, subtract it by 30, or multiples of 30 until we have a figure which is less than 30. This figure, we call it A, for example, which is the lunar epact. And this A, we subtract it from 40. 40 is a constant figure. It doesn't change. And then we get new. New is the date of the slaughtering of the lamb. So it could be any day during the week. It could be a Wednesday, Thursday, whenever. So the fourth step is that we determine the Sunday after to be the Feast of Resurrection. Okay, there is only one exception to the Apokty calculation rule. What if in the first step, when we have a figure modulo 19, there is no remainder and there is a whole integer? What do? We take the numerator to be 19, as if it is an integer, yes, which is essentially 19 divided by 19. In that case, when we multiply 19 by 11, we will get a figure that if we subtract multiples of 30, we will get 29. In that case only, this is the only exception, 29 becomes 30. And that's why
figure new
will become 10. Okay, that is the only exception. And this is basically what the Apokty calculation means and aims at. So, in order for us to view the Apokty calculation in this interesting figure, we would find the following. The period of the slaughtering of the lamb is a period of 29 days that starts from the 25th of Baramhat up until the 23rd of Baramuda. And the equation never gives us 24, as it is said in the Apokty calculation. So that means that the earliest date for the Feast of the Resurrection would be the 26th of Baramhat. According to the 25th of Baramhat, if it fell on a Saturday. And the latest day for the Feast of the Resurrection would be the 30th of Baramoda, if the 23rd of Baramoda, the slaughtering of the lamb, had fulfilled all the exceptions and it came on a Sunday. So the Sunday after will be the 30th of Baramoda. Do you remember when we said that the period of the Feast of the Resurrection and accordingly the Holy Lent period as well as the fast of the Apostles all range in a period of 35 days? That's why. Because of the earliest date and the latest date of the Feast of the Resurrection. Okay, so we would like to ask our forefathers an important question. Would the slaughtering of the lamb never come in that period? For example, before the 25th of Baramhat? Well then, our forefathers will give us three answers to this question. The first answer is that even if it does, and yes it may do, even if it does, then we have fulfilled that condition. Then it is out of the window. The second answer is that we do not rely on our own eyes. It doesn't matter when the full moon of 15th of Nisan would fall. In fact, if that is the case, then we will use the expression of the Paschal full moon, which would be the full moon of the month after Nisan, the month of Ayar. The second point is that we don't rely on our own two eyes. We have set ourselves a formula which we have all agreed to because it reflects our aim and our own understanding. Our aim is to follow the Holy Bible when we say that Jesus Christ is our Lamb, as well as giving this day to all Christians all over the world. So we are not going to do without Apokty Calculation in any date or any day. It will last with us forever. And that tells us that the Nicene forefathers, our Coptic forefathers, have already known, as we read from the history, that the vernal equinox had already shifted from the 1st century before Christ. So, the third point, which is the most important point, is that we know that the Jewish calendar is in itself a calendar based on calculations. Or maybe there are some denominations, I don't know, maybe some denominations use their eyes to detect some astronomical phenomena. Okay, if that is the case, we have nothing to do with that. We know that since the 1st century, Romans had destroyed the Jewish temple, so there is no slaughtering of the lamb ever since. It is not our goal to detect what is the real or Jewish slaughtering of the lamb. This is not our purpose. Our purpose is to agree to a date within the whole world, to all the Christians all over the world. The message, in short, is that as we discussed in all the previous slides, we can see that the Apokty Calculation has stood the test of time, has been stable throughout the ages and throughout generations, as did the Coptic calendar. But what keeps changing really is not only the Gregorian calendar per se, or the dates of the Gregorian calendar compared to the Feast of the Resurrection, but also the Easter calculation as a whole in the Catholic Church, as well as their own computus formula. This keeps changing because of the short-sightedness and ignorance of their smart guys in the 16th century, and also it is because of the average length of the Gregorian calendar which keeps changing itself. So let's carry on. So in this slide, we will discuss the flaws in the lunar adjustment in the Gregorian calendar. I called this slide by such a name, but actually I would rather have called it another title, which would be actually more relevant and more precise, which is the superiority of the Apokty calculation over the Gregorian calendar as a whole and the computus calculation of the West. Why I am saying all of this is because there are 4 flaws at the very least, 4 flaws that they have committed when they have done what they called an adjustment to the Roman calendar, basically and in short. Let's discuss them point by point. The first point, we find that the computus they created resulted in some lunar months consisting of 28 or 31 days. This is obviously unnatural and impossible. By the way, one factor in the lunar month being calculated to be 31 days is because of the inherent fault or flaw in the Gregorian calendar or the Roman calendar in general, which is the leap day of the year being in the midst of the year, the 29th of February, being amongst the days of the year. So the calculation goes off by 1 day, which results in the lunar months being calculated as 31 days in such years. But this is not the only factor. This is not actually the whole problem. The problem lies when they calculate according to the computus and they reach a result of a lunar month being either 28 or 31 days. Okay, what is the second flaw? The second flaw, actually, we find that sometimes new moons of the lunar months are ignored altogether. That's one other flaw. The third flaw really depends on the second flaw, which is that the length between 2 new moons sometimes occurs as 1 day, 28 days, 58 days, or even 59 days. By the way, it is important for me to say this now, that through this computus, there has been a number of exceptions. There are exceptions all the way through, and we will come to that really very shortly. I will speak about this right now. But let's also talk about the fourth flaw. The fourth flaw, as we can see, both the lunar and the solar corrections cancel each other out. You know, there is a very important point that we will discuss right now. In any critical appraisal, the following statement made by Lilius himself, it is of grave concern to me, because I don't want to describe it as sarcasm or describe it as a joke, but it really is a concern for me. Lilius himself had pointed out that his own lunar and solar corrections are but a mere tool in the hands of future computers, so that they can basically do whatever they please. So, bottom line is, you, Mr. Lilius, are telling us that the correction or the adjustment that you had aimed to carry out was not only not fit for purpose, but also it was difficult for you to compute and calculate, you yourself. And you said that future computers will be able to do that. They couldn't. Actually, I was talking about exceptions just briefly a short while ago. These exceptions are so many that the Western thinkers had to change the computus formula over and over again in so many generations, they have been and they are still changing.
The tables
Of this computus only lasts for about 2 or 3 centuries, and this is not what I am making up. It is written, and as we have seen in sources that we have seen and discussed before. Why is that? Because of the basic principle of the Gregorian calendar, which is every 400 years there are 3 less days in the Gregorian compared to Roman calendar or the Julian calendar. And that basically messes everything up. And when it messes things up in terms of the solar corrections or the solar calculations, it messes things up more and more so in the lunar calculations. And then nobody is able to get a grip of how the calculation should correspond with each other. And that's why there are so many exceptions. The Catholic Church rely mainly on Easter tables rather than an Easter formula. When we discuss together the Metonic cycle, we have to refer to Meton. Meton is a Greek scientist who lived in the 5th century before Christ, and pretty much like Dionysius and Copernicus, he did the very same thing. He copied and plagiarized the sciences of the ancient Chinese and the ancient Babylonians and took from them the Metonic cycle. The Metonic cycle was ascribed to him, but actually it was not his own doing, it was not his theory. He just took the sciences from the other civilizations. So what did the ancient Chinese and Babylonians see? Actually, they have noticed that in the zodiac, both the sun and the moon come out from one point and start to separate from each other until they get back to the same point in the zodiac after 19 years. These 19 years are 19 solar years and 235 lunar months. In total, they are about 6,939 or 6,940 days. That is, in short, the Metonic cycle, the 19-year cycle. So, let's now focus on the lunisolar calendar, which we know that the Jewish calendar is a prime example of the Metonic cycle. And as we had said before, the best person who did mathematical calculations, logical and arithmetic, in his mind and developed it for the sake of the Apokty calculation was Anba'anatolius in the 3rd century after Christ, after Anba'Demetrius, the vine dresser, had established the rules and the canons of the Apokty calculation. So now, we have, as we can see, the 2 calendars, the solar calendar, and it is represented by the Coptic and the Julian years. And we can see, in parallel, the Jewish calendar. So we know in the solar calendar that we have 3 simple years and then the 4th is a leap year. But in the Jewish calendar, it's not that straightforward. There are simple years, as in the case of the dark blue rectangle. These years usually consist of 354 days, but sometimes they can consist of 355 days if it is a long simple year, or 353 days if it is a short simple year. Likewise, the dark orange or the orange rectangle represents the leap year. The leap year on average consists of 384 days, but it can also consist of 385 days in long leap years and 383 days in short leap years. The leap years rule for the Jewish calendar is that they are inserted in the 3rd, the 6th, the 8th, the 11th, the 14th, the 17th, and the 19th years of the Metonic cycle. 7 years in total. 7 years of 13 months and 12 years of 12 months. So the total number will be 235 lunar months. All right. And lastly, as we can see, the Gregorian calendar. The Gregorian calendar, the biggest mistake and the biggest flaw in the Gregorian calendar is that it falls out of sync with the Jewish calendar. Now, let's carry on and see the next diagram. There it is. These are two calendars in parallel, the Coptic or the Julian year with the Jewish year. And as we can see, the first year in both is a simple year, but the Coptic or the Julian year is longer than the Jewish year by 11 days. Okay, the second year, the difference gets longer to 22 days. The third year, because it is a leap year in the Jewish calendar, actually the difference shortens and it becomes 3 days. Then the fourth year, it lengthens again up to 14 days. And then the fifth year, it lengthens again to 25 days. And it will carry on like this, lengthening and shortening until the 19 years have all elapsed, or 235 lunar months, or 6,940 days approximately. And the two calendars will match hand in hand, step by step. I have a little contemplation, and I would like to ask you to please allow me to share it with you. I have always wondered why in the Ajbiya prayers in the morning we have 19 psalms as opposed to 12 psalms in the other Ajbiya prayers, excepting of course the prayers of the midnight hour and the prayers of the veil for our fathers the monks. It was only through this piece of work that I had realized the answer. The answer simply is that our forefathers are referring to the resurrection. And what other better way to refer to the resurrection except by reference to the Metonic cycle, the 19-year cycle? Because this is exactly the tool that we rely on in determining the feast of the resurrection. So 19 years are represented in the morning prayer by 19 psalms. So the spiritual message is very clear and very simple. Our forefathers keep reminding us that the morning prayer is but a symbol for the resurrection. Because when we get up, when we wake up from sleep, this signifies or symbolizes the resurrection. And there is another depth to this spiritual message and this symbol. When we delve a little bit deeper into the scientific meaning itself, as we have seen, it is only after 19 years that the sun rejoins the same place where it meets up again with the moon in their relevant cycles. So that also tells us that we join up the day and the night in prayer. We spend the whole day praying. So even this simple scientific meaning gives us a bit more depth into the spiritual message. And that is my contemplation. 19 psalms in the morning prayer always reminds us of the resurrection as our forefathers intended to teach us. In this table, we can see the dates of Easter versus the Feast of Resurrection for the Catholic Church and the Eastern churches and the Coptic Church per se. So, in the right side of this table, we will find our diagrammatic representation of both the Coptic or Julian year versus the Jewish year. And this will simply highlight to us the difference between the Apokty calculation and the modern Catholic computus. The modern Catholic computus, which really fails to calculate many things, as we will see right now. So, in the current Metonic cycle, it has started in the year 2014. So the 19-year period of the Metonic cycle starts from 2014 and ends in 2032. Right, let's focus on the dates. We will find that in the first year, the year 2014, the two dates coincide together. Fine. In the second year, the dates will be shifted a little bit forward because, as we said before, the Coptic or the Julian calendar, and indeed the Gregorian calendar, is 11 days longer than the Jewish year. So the date will shift forward. What about the third year? In the third year, according to the Jewish calendar, it is a leap year, which means that there are 29 or 30 more days in that year. And that means that the Feast of Resurrection will, according to the Coptic calendar and to the Apokty calculation, will be shifted backwards. It will come later than the previous 2 years. But we find that that is not the case with the modern Catholic computus. Why? We will see just right now, because it fails in calculating the full moon, the Paschal full moon. It actually calculates the full moon after the vernal equinox, which is actually of the month Adar the second. The month Adar the second is the final month of the Jewish year after Adar the first, which is the leap month. So the leap month is usually the 12th month, and the 13th month is Adar the second. So it is not the Paschal full moon. This does not only happen once in every Metonic cycle. As we can see, in the fourth year, the dates will shift forward according to the Apokty calculation. That, however, is not the case according to the modern Catholic computus. But that's fine. Fifth year, it is not a leap year in the Jewish calendar, but the sixth year is. So after the dates move forward, they move backward again in the sixth year, which is 2019. That is similar to the Gregorian calendar. In the current year, 2020, which is the seventh year in the Metonic cycle, both dates will have shifted forward, but the next year is going to be a leap year in the Jewish calendar. What can we see? According to the Apokty calculation, the Feast of Resurrection will be moving backwards. However, in the Gregorian calendar, what can we see? Apparently, we will see this happen furthermore in the 11th year of the Metonic cycle, which is 2024, in the 14th year of the Metonic cycle, which is 2027, and in the 19th and final year of the Metonic cycle, which is 2032. The dates of the Feast of Resurrection shift backwards relative to the previous years, but that is not the same case in the Gregorian calendar. Let's move on to another very interesting figure to show us why this happens astronomically. There we go. In this figure, we can see that we come across a period that spans over 100 years, from the year 1950 up until 2050. I took this figure from Wikipedia, but I added something that is not on Wikipedia. If you search, you would not find it. I added those black hexagons to denote the dates of the slaughtering of the lamb. I relied upon another website, another Jewish website, to tell me when the Paschal slaughtering of the lamb occurs. So we will easily see that in the current Metonic cycle, which started in the year 2014, the third year which is the year 2016, that's where the Easter celebration is, and that is the full moon of Adar the 2nd, and not the Paschal full moon, not the full moon of Nisan, the first month of spring in the Jewish calendar, and not relating whatsoever to the day of slaughtering of the lamb. Okay, let's carry on and focus on the 11th year, which is the year 2024. The same thing happens. The 14th year, which is the year 2027, the very same thing happens. But if we look at the dates of the Feast of the Resurrection and the dates of celebration in the Eastern churches, we will find that nothing at all goes amiss. Nothing at all at no point in time in these 100 years, and before and after. We can do further researches if you like, and we can extrapolate and draw things in the future and draw things in the past. In fact, there are some websites, as I have shown the references before, that calculate all Easter dates according to the Gregorian calendar, but more importantly, the feasts of resurrection according to the Coptic Church and the Eastern churches. Okay, let's carry on and see the next Metonic cycle, which should start from the year 2033. It should end in the year 2051, the 19-year cycle, but unfortunately we have up until 2050. Again, we can do this as a research. But in any case, the 19th year per se is not that important to show the same pattern happening again, the same flaw and the same miscalculation, and it is astronomical now. It is not just pragmatic or practical, it is astronomical. We can see in the third year, in the year 2035, the same thing happens. The Easter celebration follows the full moon of Adar the 2nd and not the Paschal full moon. The very same thing happens in the 11th year, which is the year 2043, and the same thing happens in the 14th year, which is the year 2046. Right. Is this only in the future? Let's go back. The last Metonic cycle before the current one had started in the year 1995. So we will see exactly the same thing happening again in the third year, which is the year 1997. The same thing happening again in the 11th year, which is the year 2005, and in the 14th year, which is the year 2008. What about the Metonic cycle beforehand? The Metonic cycle would have started in the year 1976. So we can see the third year, 1978, the same thing happening. In the year 1986, which is the 11th year in the Metonic cycle, same thing. 1989, same thing. In addition to what we have already discussed so far, we would find 3 dates in the 20th and the 21st century. Those dates are the year 1967, the year 1981, and the year 2049, where the Western Easter falls on the day of the astronomical full moon. I don't understand. Your purpose from the beginning was that astronomically the dates were messed up and you were going to correct them. And even Lilius himself said that I have left the computation for scientists coming after me to be able to use it as a flexible tool in their hands to correct what I couldn't. I am so glad that he had died before the Gregorian calendar was already established or had started. What is this? I am lost for words. I cannot say anything. So the only condition that the Gregorian calendar fulfills is that the Western Easter falls on a Sunday. Well, thank God for that. What can I say? I have nothing to say. What about the Metonic cycle beforehand? The one which had started in the year 1957? We will see the very same pattern. This is the year
1959.
Then 1967 and 1970. So let's be very clear. In order to avoid any misconceptions or misinformation from people who have not studied these things in that much depth, please be aware and be careful. The Gregorian calendar did not prove its use, its utility, its usefulness. It didn't. The Apokty calculation remains superior to the Western computus, to the modern Catholic computus. Our forefathers, from as far back as the 4th century, did have much more knowledge and much more understanding, and by deciding the laws they were able to cover every potential eventuality. But these so-called smart guys, when they tried to modernize things and indeed isolate themselves from the rest of the Christian world, they messed everything up. That's everything in a nutshell. And we are not talking only astronomically, we are also talking pragmatically, practically, spiritually, and religiously, and however else you would like to describe it. So our message to the younger generations and our children is that the Apokty calculation stood the test of time across the generations, across all the ages. It never miscalculated anything at any one point in time at all. And we have seen that already, and we will see this furthermore when we talk about other things, especially relating to the vernal equinox. When we talk about the vernal equinox, as per the definition, equinox literally means equal night, which gives us the impression that the night is equal to the day, or the lengths of each is equal to one another. This is not entirely accurate. Neither was it accurate in the 16th century, nor is it accurate today, and we are going to discuss exactly what that means. But this is the whole dilemma, that these smart guys thought that it should be an astronomical equinox. This is untrue, and in fact, equinox depends mainly on the latitude. So the equinox in one place differs from another, and from another, and so on and so forth. Let's see the next figure as well, to find out a bit more about vernal equinox throughout the ages. In this figure, we will discuss 3 points. The first point is the vernal equinox throughout history and throughout the ages. The second point is up above in that figure. We will compare the dates to the Coptic dates. Obviously they will be Roman dates, whether Julian or Gregorian, compared to the Coptic dates. And the third point, we will come to it a little bit later, on what the modern sciences tell us about the vernal equinox in particular, as well as all the other astronomical phenomena. Okay, as we have already discussed, Sosigenes, the Egyptian scientist, helped Julius Caesar to establish the Julian calendar. Julius Caesar determined the vernal equinox to be on the 25th of March, and consequently the summer solstice to be on the 24th of June, and consequently the winter solstice would fall on the 25th of December in the 1st century before Christ. These dates shifted approximately, in an approximate manner, shifted in the 1st century after the birth of Christ to be 24th of March, 23rd of June, and 24th of December. In the 2nd century, they have shifted even further to March the 23rd and June the 22nd, and the winter solstice on December the 23rd. In the 3rd century after Christ, they have shifted even further. The vernal equinox was falling on the 22nd of March. So, we can now understand what happened in the 4th century. In the 4th century, please be aware that the vernal equinox fell on the 21st of March and the winter solstice fell on the 21st of December in the 4th century when they determined Christmas. We will come to that point later. What about the 16th century? The 16th century, the vernal equinox shifted more and more, and it came on the 11th of March. However, as we have known and discussed, in the year 1582 itself, the vernal equinox fell on the 10th of March, and the winter solstice would have followed suit and fell on the 10th of December, but it was changed to the 21st of December because of the new Gregorian calendar. After this, after 1582, the vernal equinox became the 21st of March. But let us be very clear. When scientists did some past projections, or proleptic projections as they call it, they found that in the 19th century, the vernal equinox used to come in a period between the 19th and 21st of March, not just one day. And this continued to happen even in the 20th and the 21st centuries. And the day most frequently the vernal equinox falls on is the 20th of March. So what do we want to say? We want to say that the vernal equinox, as well as the summer solstice and the winter solstice, they all do not come on a fixed day each century. These are all approximate values, approximate calculations, but they come in a period. And for the vernal equinox, as we have seen, it is used to coming between the 19th and the 21st of March. However, for the winter solstice, it is used to coming between the 20th and 22nd of December, most frequently on the 21st of December. So, when we ask the Catholic smart guys, did you know that actually the vernal equinox does not fall on the same day each and every year throughout the centuries? They will probably say yes. And they have designated the 21st of March to be an ecclesiastical vernal equinox. And no, I am not telling a joke. This is what they did. They corrected what they thought to be an astronomical flaw and then called it ecclesiastical, not astronomical. Why? Because they couldn't do any better. They couldn't. It is not a joke. Trust me, it is not. This is documented in history. There are many sources and resources talking about that, as you may have seen already in the references that we have been discussing. That's all I wanted to say in terms of the vernal equinox for this point. So the message we would like to tell to our children and the young generations is basically that there are many proofs that have been documented and discussed about the Gregorian calendar not being precise, neither in the aim that it was meant for, nor in the calculations that they had claimed or purported to devise to be better than olden calculations. Actually, if anything, we have seen that the calculations of old have been more far-sighted, more scientific, even more religious and more spiritual. And that's it for the point of vernal equinox. Okay, now I would like to refute with you one big fallacy that so many people hold, and some people asked me that question about what would happen when the Feast of Resurrection would fall in the summer. I'm going to answer this right now by calculations, but before we do that, let us discuss what is summer. Is summer right now the same as it was in the 20th century, or in the 16th century, or even in the 4th century? The answer is no. These things are relative. The second point, in addition to that, is that nowadays, I know this, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that in Egypt, in March, the temperature rises up to 30 degrees and 35 degrees. Is that summer or spring? Okay. And moreover, some people would know this already, that in Canada and in North America, sometimes there are snow blizzards that happen in August and in September. In fact, I live in England. In England, some years we have snow falling in April, just before the Feast of the Resurrection. Is that summer or winter or autumn or spring or what? And added to all those points, if meteorologists and scientists have agreed that summer is the 21st of June or 20th of June, do you know that Ireland, which is a country in Europe, and it's separated from the UK mainland by a sea, so the weather is not really that high. It's not like Australia, for example, or Egypt, or parts of the equatorial countries. Ireland, in its culture and folklore, they actually hold that summer falls between May and August. Why is that? Why are you different from all the other countries in the world? These are all things that are relative. They do not mean a thing except for the person that believes in them. But in any case, let us do our mathematical calculation just to refute this point and disprove the argument altogether. From what we have discussed already, the furthest day of the Feast of the Resurrection is the 30th of Baramoda, right? And we know that as per the rules of the Gregorian calendar versus the Julian calendar and the Coptic, consequently, that every 400 years there is only one leap year and 3 century simple years, as opposed to 4 leap years in the Julian and the Coptic calendar. That means that there is a difference of days shifting by 3 days every 400 years. So the calendar will move forward according to the Gregorian calendar 3 days every 400 years. Right? Okay. So we know that the 30th of Baramoda, which is the furthest day that the Feast of Resurrection would fall on, comes about 3 to 5 times every 532 years. Why 532 years? Because 19 years Metonic cycle and 28 years solar cycle. Apparently there is a solar cycle as well, and the Apokty calculation actually determines that. But this is not our aim in our discussion for this particular topic. So every 532 years, this 30th of Baramoda comes as the Feast of the Resurrection 3 to 5 times. The 30th of Baramoda falls on the 8th of May in the 20th and the 21st centuries. What do I mean to say? For the 30th of Baramoda to shift from the 8th of May and go towards the 20th of June, which is the summer solstice, how many days it needs? Okay, you guessed it, 43 days. So how many centuries would take the Feast of Resurrection, the furthest day of the Feast of the Resurrection, which only occurs 3 to 5 times every 532 years? How many centuries it would take to fall in the summer? By a simple calculation, as we all know, the X will reveal the figure of 5,700 years. So that means that we will have to be very cautious and very concerned that from the 20th century, from the start of the year 1900, the Feast of the Resurrection is coming in the summer of the year 7,600 or within the period of 532 years after 7,600, 3 or 5 times. And yes, you can say that I'm joking now. What can I say? Now, let's discuss together a secondary outcome that came out of the Gregorian calendar adjustment, which is the average length of the Gregorian calendar itself. So many people, however highly ranked, believe that the average year in the Gregorian calendar is 365 days, 5 hours and 48 minutes and 45 seconds. That is wrong. That figure is actually the average length of the solar, or otherwise called the tropical year. This is the average and just the arithmetic average of the revolution of the Earth around the Sun. So, what is the average year length in the Gregorian calendar? It's actually 365 days, 5 hours, 49 minutes and 12 seconds. So that's about 26 or 27 seconds longer than the average solar or tropical year. And that's why I keep repeating the very same principle, that the days are going to shift forward in the Gregorian calendar as well. So I imagine myself asking one of the smart guys of the Catholic Church in the 16th century, in your opinion, that 365 days and 6 hours were too long by 11 minutes 14 seconds a year, and people call the Coptic Orthodox pedantic? I don't know how on earth can I describe yourselves if for the sake of 11 minutes 14 seconds a year you devised a new calendar which proved to be of no value to yourselves first before anybody else, because you knew that everything is going to change in terms of the Easter celebration, the Easter dates and the holy fire, and isolating yourselves from the rest of the Christian world. And on top of all of this, you knew that the vernal equinox is not going to remain the 21st of March every year. And so you called it an ecclesiastical vernal equinox? Seriously? I don't know. I don't know how to answer. I don't know how any one of those smart guys could answer me. Okay, so let's compare two other types of years. Now we have the average length of the Jewish year, and it is longer than the mean average of the tropical year by 7 minutes. And we know that the Coptic or the Julian year averages 365 days and 6 hours, which means that it is longer than the average of the tropical year by 11 minutes 14 seconds. And lastly, the Metonic year, the average is longer by about 18 minutes. So we can see now that actually the mean length of the Coptic year serves our faith and serves our practical issues in calendrical terms, which means that the average length of the Coptic or Julian year lies between the Metonic year average and the Jewish year average. And that means that the Apokty calculation will never mess up, neither will the calculation of the Feast of the Resurrection, consequently, or any of our Coptic dates at all, because they are based on the Metonic cycle, as we have discussed over and over again. So I'd like to ask those smart guys a question. Is there no solar calendar on Earth that you could copy that is actually even close to the mean average of the year's length? Yes, there is. And I have no idea, and I cannot understand why those smart guys have not really copied the Persian sciences once more, because the Persian sciences, when it comes to solar calendars, are really ahead of any other nation and any other civilization in the world. So the Persian calendar, as well as some Indian calendars, are really very close to the mean arithmetic average of the solar year's length. They only differ by 1 second. I wonder why they had not copied this. Either they were ignorant, or they may have realized that the work attached to adopting such a calendar would be a huge and a marvelous task that they couldn't do, as if they managed to apply any scientific logical principles to the Gregorian calendar in the first place. In fact, relating to all of this, modern sciences and modern scientists tell us that, as we can see in this figure, the poles of the elliptic path that the Earth follows do not really look alike. They are not similar to each other. That is not the only scientific fact. We will talk about 3 things which are now proven to affect the speed of the Earth. The Earth is slowing down because of those 3 factors. Actually, they are all related to the global warming. And as we know, and as we discussed very shortly before, the temperature now is not like what it used to be 100 years ago, not even 50 years ago. But the 3 factors are, first of all, the melting of glaciers. The second factor is tidal deceleration, and the third factor is the wind speed. All those 3 factors are affected by global warming, and they themselves affect the speed of the Earth to the extent that it is said that from the year 2035 onwards, or maybe from the second half of the 21st century, the Earth's revolution around the Sun will take 365 days and 6 hours more consistently, more regularly compared to how it used to be, which means that it will actually come closer to the average length of the Coptic or the Julian calendar year. So I say to the people who are in favor of changing our calendar, is this scientific? Are you really thinking that by following other people, and I'm not even talking about following other people as in our church losing its leadership role? No, I am just talking about following unscientific people and unscientific methodologies, which actually led to some practices which they themselves now have realized that they are unscientific and not fit for purpose. I know the answer, and I am sure you all know the answer with me. When we talk about the leap seconds, this is something that the modern scientists have introduced because they have, as we have said before, realized that the days are actually deviating in the Gregorian calendar. So, since the year 1972, they have added what is called the leap second. And just before we go into discussing the leap second, I'd like to start by saying that with the commencement of introducing this leap second, that scientifically means that we are actually not following the rules of the Gregorian calendar anymore. We are, scientifically speaking, strictly speaking, not on the Gregorian calendar right now. So in simple terms, the way it works is as follows. In regular years, as we all know, we have the clock, and it counts the seconds from 55 seconds up to 59, and then it is changed into a new day and a new year. But what happens when they insert a leap second? We would find the following, that it starts counting up from 55, 56, and so on and so forth until it reaches 60, it counts 60, and then it is a new day and a new year. So the point in short is that they have done all of this since the year 1972 to put the years and the days back on track, because they have found that they have already deviated and they keep deviating from the Gregorian calendar. In short, we are not following the Gregorian calendar rules anymore. Another secondary outcome we would like to discuss together is Christmas, the day that they had invented in the 4th century. Let's see how this happened from the historical point of view first, and then the religious and spiritual point of view as well. The 25th of December used to be the winter solstice in the 1st century before Christ, but it had moved to the 24th of December by the 1st century after the birth of Christ. As we said, the days were shifting all the time in an approximate manner every century. And pagans used to have feasts in the olden days, even before the Julian calendar, which always culminated in the winter solstice, because the sun, as well as other stars, were the focus of their worship. But the winter solstice used to mark the days having long nights, and afterwards the days will start to get longer and brighter. So, in a nutshell, in the 1st century, these pagans used to prolong their feasts up to 7 and sometimes even 8 days to culminate on the 25th of December, even though astronomically the 24th of December was the winter solstice in the 1st century after the birth of Christ. So, in the 2nd century after the birth of Christ, we have already discussed the history of the Coptic Church, and we know the Apokty Calculation and by Demetrius, the vine dresser, and sending his methodology to the Second Council of Rome, a non-ecumenical council. And in those days, even though the winter solstice had shifted to the 23rd of December, the Romans did not believe that it had shifted at all. They had followed Julius Caesar in marking the days according to him and believing that the days stayed as they are and the phenomena stayed static. Winter solstice was the 25th of December, even though it was the 23rd of December in the 2nd century. In the 3rd century, Aurelian, I don't know exactly how it is pronounced, one of the emperors of Rome, built a temple for some god and dedicated it to that god in the year 274 on the 25th of December. Even though the winter solstice had shifted even further, and in that century it would have been the 22nd of December. And then the 4th century. This is our interesting point and the crux of the discussion. In the 4th century, the winter solstice had moved to the 21st of December. However, the Romans, or the Church of Rome as a whole, did not believe in such a thing, and they designated the 25th of December to be their Christmas. Before this, Constantine was not Christian as yet, And in the year 321, he made a day of the week dedicated to the sun, calling it Sunday, and making it a holiday for all the Roman Empire. 5 years later, even after the Council of Nicaea, on which he presided, he still was not Christian by that time. He built an Arch of Victory in the year 326. This is shortly before becoming a Christian, either in that year or the year after, something like this, as the history says. And later, some references say the year 336 itself. Some say after 336, and some say even as late as 351 or 352, the Christmas was invented. And Pope Julius I was the one behind this invention, or at least he was a big protagonist in the invention of such a day. And it is said that he was actually full of Arianist beliefs, even though not more than 11 or 12 years before the Council of Nicaea demolished the Arian heresy. The main point is, in the 4th century, the 25th of December was chosen because they thought that it was still the winter solstice. Obviously, the Coptic Church forefathers used to reject this notion, and up until that time, they were not in agreement with this, neither astronomically nor on the basis of principle, because they did not want Jesus Christ to be a mere worldly king that could have birthdays celebrated as other emperors or kings or whatever. They continued to celebrate the theophany, the revelation of God in the flesh, on the 11th of Tuba, and they continued to do that up until the 5th century. Up until the year 432, which coincided with 149 year of the martyrs. So on the 29th of Kiak, 149, that was the very first time that the Coptic Church celebrated the Feast of Nativity. And they called it Feast of Nativity rather than Christmas, because Nativity means that Jesus Christ became a native of the earth, again to reflect God's wonder in having a flesh and taking a flesh and appearing in the flesh in the world or on earth. And that means that it took Copts about 80 to 90 years to mull things over and think it through thoroughly and from all the bases. And once they came to the conclusion that yes, we accept the 25th of December, which in the Julian calendar coincided with the 29th of Kiak, as we have said before repeatedly, they celebrated the Feast of Nativity in the 5th century based on two main principles. The first principle is that it comes 9 months after the Feast of Annunciation, and the second principle is that we were all one church after all. That was before the Council of Chalcedon. So after all, even though the Coptic Church conceded, it conceded for a valid reason, and the reason that it had studied thoroughly and not just haphazardly. And one last point to say, which is that they designated the 29th of Kiak 149 Anno Martyri to coincide with the 25th of the 10th month Kislev, the 10th month of the Hebrews, the Hebrew calendar. Because apparently, and as we have already discussed repeatedly in this video before, the Jewish calendar was the main basis of establishing all, or let me say most of the churchly events and the churchly feasts, primarily, and secondarily the feasts all over the world, because as we have seen, it was the Coptic Church who established the Feast of the Resurrection by definition and propagated it to the whole world. Even though we have already discussed this, the Church of Rome was still in disagreement. So they had continued to disagree, while the Coptic Orthodox Church agreed with what they had argued when they saw that there was a religious benefit as such. The message is very clear and very basic, that our Coptic forefathers did not do anything without thinking first, without mulling things over and thinking about it from all angles, however long it may have taken. And that is very good. We have already spoken about that. We do not rely solely on science, but science comes as part of our reasoning in the church. And our Coptic forefathers were really well learned and well read than all the other people, especially all the other churches. So it is no surprise that when things have been set in the Coptic Church, they have been set in stone. And they have been really inscribed with letters and figures of gold that last for generations and generations, and they last up until now without any detail missing at all. I cannot describe enough how much I have read about the Coptic forefathers when I was preparing for this. And as I said before, I will say it once again, and I will never tire of saying this. I wouldn't have believed what Father Dawood Lamai or any bishop or any pope saying things about the Coptic forefathers until I have read them. I am sorry. I do not really follow blindly unless it is a matter of faith and a matter of spiritual growth. Yes, I take it from my fathers, my bishops, my priests. But for historical facts, for scientific facts, I need to read. And when I read, I actually found that the Coptic forefathers, the whole world owe it to them. I am saying this again and again. Owe it to them for preserving the Christian faith. And not just because of the Apokty Calculation and the Feast of the Resurrection and the unity of the churches or anything else, or the Holy Fire, or even the country-wide miracles that are not known in any other country in the world, like, for example, the moving of the Muqattam mountain, or the apparitions of Virgin Mary on a country-wide basis for everyone to see, or the Nile drought and the prayers of our popes that made it flourish again, like Pope Peter El Gawli, and the current miraculous events when the sun rays fall on the altars of saints and the Virgin Mary and Archangel Michael in Egyptian churches in their corresponding feasts. All of these are seen by the whole world, if not even by other faiths, other non-Christian people only, if only those, but I'm sure all the world knows about it by now. So the message again is that we should be proud of who we are. And I will say this, and I'm sure some people may misunderstand what I mean, but it's only because I work in the field of child psychiatry. I have been working with children, and I know their reactions, their beliefs, and how they are brought up. Seriously, for our children to love the forefathers and the church, they need to love us first. If we love our own fathers, we will reflect this on the church. If they love us, they will reflect this on the church, and vice versa. If we love the church, we will find ourselves loving our own fathers and our children loving us. This is psychology. I am not talking about any spiritual instructions or any guidance or anything like that at all. This is mere psychology, and it is easy. They will see for themselves how this is reflected on our love of our church and of our forefathers, and they will do the same. They will basically copy us in what we are doing. That's it. That is the message I would like to finish on. And just a personal disclaimer, I have never been that close to the Coptic Church. I wish I had been, but having read about this particular topic and subject made me realize and understand what I never had realized before. I am asking you to read more and to research, and surely you will find out what I have already found out, because it is readily available. In this day and age of information technology, and our children not being people who can be deceived easily by misinformation that could be propagated on YouTube like this, or on TV, or in newspapers, these are not reliable pieces of information. We need to research and we need to dig deeper and find the right resources for us. I would like to ask you all to correct me if I have made any mistake in what we have discussed together, and please mention me in your prayers, me and my family.